Welcome. This is David Boles, Human Meme. Today, 5 fires changed the world. Fire destroys and resurrects. Fire is important to all our cultural memes. The phoenix rises from his ashes. Fire warms us and allows us to cook food. Fire is the sun at night. Here is the story of 5 first fires that set the world ablaze with death and reformation. The first fire, an elegy. This fire was set in 1821. The poet, Shelley, wrote the following in Adonis, an elegy on the death of John Keats. By man and beast and earth and air and sea, burns bright or dim, as each are mirrors of the fire for which all thirst now beams on me, consuming the last clouds of cold mortality. Engulfed by regret and admiration, Shelley leads us out of the ash and into a new understanding of the world waiting around us, beaming like the moon. The next fire, in the horn. This fire is the death of the prehistoric world and the birth of the American Old West. In the novel No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy, fire is at the center of the story, inescapable. The book was famously made into a movie by Joel Coen and Ethan Coen. To feel the fire and examine it from all cogent sides, let's take a look at the last sentence from the last page of the book. The final page of the final lines of the original screenplay, and the final say in the final cut of the movie that was released in theaters. And we'll do this to understand how this idea of fire to end a story changed in translation and adaptation, and watch for the color of the moon. The book. He just rode on past, and he had his blanket wrapped around him, and he had his head down, and when he rode past, I seen he was carrying fire in a horn, the way people used to do. And I could see the horn from the light inside of it, about the color of the moon. And in the dream, I knew that he was going on ahead, and that he was fixing to make a fire somewhere out there in all that dark and all that cold, and I knew that whenever I got there, he would be there. And then I woke up. Now, here's that same scene, written on the page in the original screenplay, adapted by Joel Coen and Ethan Coen. There are also written action descriptions as well in the dialogue that you'll see. He just rode on past, and he had his blanket wrapped around him and his head down. The rider passes as described, horses' hooves drumming and scattering divots of earth and snow. And when he rode past, I seen he was carrying a fire in a horn, the way people used to do, and I could see the horn from the light inside of it, about the color of the moon. And in the dream I knew that he was going on ahead, and that he was fixing to make a fire somewhere out there in all that dark and all that cold, and I knew that whenever I got there, he would be there, out there, up ahead. And here is the end of it, from book to screenplay on the page to what we actually see in the theater in the movie. He had his blanket wrapped around him and his head down. When he rode past, I seen he was carrying a fire in a horn, the way people used to, and I could see the horn from the light inside it, about the color of the moon. And in the dream, I knew that he was going on ahead. He was fixing to make a fire somewhere out there in all that dark and cold. And I knew that whenever I got there, he'd be there. And then I woke up. Incredible storytelling, all different, all describing the same exact moment, the same end of the story, the conclusion of the myth, and the beginning of the cultivation of people coming out of darkness. Fire indicated the death of the old world, all the color of the new moon, as we learn to preserve coals and keep fire alive between tundras. The modern Old West was settled between 1800 and 1912, with, among other tools and transits, transferable fire. And the truly expansive development of the West was no longer at chance, no longer nomadic, but now purposeful and built. The third fire, San Francisco. The next world-changing fire was in 1906, in San Francisco, as the entire city burned after a 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck the city, and 3,000 people died, and 80% of the city was leveled. 90% of that destroyed by fire. It was one of the most deadly natural disasters in American history, and the deadliest of all in the history of the state of California. In 3 days, 500 city blocks burned, mainly from misconceived natural gas mains that had cracked in the street during the earthquake. Some firefighters, hoping to create a fire break for the city, set off sticks of dynamite to demolish buildings and stop the fire. But that didn't work when the exploded buildings caught fire as well. The city continued to burn without pause, but with purpose, 4 days, 4 nights. That San Francisco fire caused a rethinking of city safety and how we conceive earthquake responses and natural disasters that pile upon each other to chain kill thousands of people. That San Francisco fire also created a lesson in insurance coverage as people set fire to their earthquake-destroyed houses so they could get their insurance to pay for the damage. Fire was covered, earthquakes were not. That 1906 fire indicated the death of the old machine and the rise of technology in firefighting, catastrophe prediction, and, I argue, the speckled nuance and denials of many federal flood insurance claims today. The fourth fire, Watts. In 1965, a black driver was arrested for driving drunk in Los Angeles in the Watts neighborhood. There was an altercation with the police, and reports of racism and police brutality spread, and riots began in the black community. 6 days of fire in Los Angeles began to burn. 34 people died. $50 million worth of damage was done to 1,500 buildings, 300 burned flat to the ground, and 4,500 members of the California National Guard were called to the rescue to help try to salvage the commercial viability of Watts and to stop the looting of 200 businesses. Here is the resounding significance of that Watts fire. I argue Watts actually burned, unseen, hot, molten, just below the surface, for 30 years. And when we think of the O.J. Simpson not guilty verdict for the murder of 2 people in 1995, we are actually feeling the earthquake echoes set against Watts in 1965. O.J.'s not guilty was not payback for the Los Angeles Police Department beating of Rodney King in 1992, as some argue. O.J. was a generational payback from the black community to white policing, in trouble with damages for gestational and institutionalized interstitials on both sides of the thin blue line. And it takes ongoing cultural memes, new children, the aged dying, and more than 21 years to fester such a public explosion of morality, memes, and values. For 6 days and nights in August 1965, Watts remodeled the death of the inner city and gave birth to the suffocating momentum of suburban flight to unbind the races from confrontation and mixing, and we've been stratified as a nation world ever since. The final fire, Byzantium. We close our conversation with a bit of another poem to anneal our weeping fiery wounds, Sailing to Byzantium. It's a W.B. Yeats poem published in 1928. And the first line of the poem is this: "That is no country for old men." Ah! That Yeats poetic phrase was the inspiration for Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men novel. And that's how the living work. That's how a meme lives. That is how memory perpetuates between us. Everything is connected. We all flow. Every circle closes only to begin again. And here's a beautiful bit of that Yeats poem that sets the rest of us aflame, beaming like the moon casting shadows on a rocky sea. O sages standing in God's holy fire, as in the gold mosaic of a wall, come from the holy fire, purn in a gyre, and be the singing masters of my soul. Consume my heart away, sick with desire, and fastened to a dying animal. It knows not what it is, and gather me into the artifice of eternity. These 5 fires broke the world apart, with grief and longing and hope and fear. The Industrial Revolution grew, and mechanisms began to take over morality, and justice delayed was justice undone. All acted in the name of a flame that is both delicate and unbearable. like the color of the moon. Thank you for listening. Be a human meme.